850 Tomahawks launched in one campaign against 110 expected in FY 2026 is not a war update. It is a strategic alarm. That gap means the United States can still unleash terrifying firepower, but it may be spending years of replacement capacity in weeks. If that pace is real, then the scariest thing in the story is not the launch itself. It is the reload that does not come fast enough. 57 rounds total in the FY 2026 production line is the kind of number that should make every victory headline feel smaller. A country that can burn through hundreds of premium cruise missiles in a month cannot stay comfortable budgeting in dozens. That is not a wartime pipeline. That is a peacetime drip trying to explain away a wartime hemorrhage. At least 5 years to replenish 500 Tomahawks already fired means the real battlefield may be time itself. Leaders can order launches in minutes, but replacing the weapons that make those launches possible can take longer than the rim. Crisis, longer than the headlines, and longer than the public's memory. That is what 850 Tomahawks really means. America may have bought short-term strike power with long-term strategic debt. If you are here for the version of war that gets more dangerous after the explosions, subscribe now, because this channel is not about fireworks. It is about the hidden math that can break a superpower while it still looks invincible. And tell me in the comments whether 850 Tomahawks sounds like overwhelming strength to you, or the exact moment America realized its most important weapon might actually be time. Here is the core answer the title owes the audience. 850 Tomahawks does not mainly mean America is powerful enough to fire them. Everybody already assumes that. It means America may not be built to replace them at the speed a real war now demands. That is why this title hits so hard. It sounds like a missile story, but underneath it is an industrial story, a time story, and a future war story all at once. The missile count gets the click, but the reload timeline is what messes with the viewer's head, because once you hear 850, the next question is immediate and brutal. How many were there to begin with? How many are left? How many are already reserved for some bigger nightmare? And how long until the ones already gone become real weapons again? Instead of budget promises, that is audience intent in its purest form. People are not clicking for launch porn. They are clicking because they want to know whether this number means dominance or danger. An estimated inventory of roughly 3,100 Tomahawks means 850 fired is not some tiny slice that disappears inside a giant warehouse. It suggests that in about 1 month, a meaningful share of a core long-range strike stockpile may have already been consumed. Once you see that, the story stops sounding like abundance and starts sounding like exposure. If that estimate is even close, then the number 850 changes shape immediately. It stops being an abstract count of missiles launched at Iran and becomes a fraction of something finite, expensive, and strategically precious. In plain English, it means America did not just spend ordnance, it spent margin. And margin is everything in a great power military. Margin is what gives presidents options before they have to escalate harder. Margin is what lets admirals think about the next theater without panicking about the current one. Margin is what makes strength feel effortless. And once that margin starts thinning, even a superpower begins acting differently. That is why the Tomahawk matters more than a lot of other weapons. It is not cheap, not disposable, and not just another line item you can shrug off, because more will show up next quarter. It is a premium standoff weapon, designed for exactly the kind of opening strike environment where speed, distance, and survivability matter most. So when a war starts eating Tomahawks at this pace, it means commanders believe the situation was dangerous enough, urgent enough, and valuable enough to spend some of their best long-range tools early. That alone tells you how serious the opening phase was. But it also tells you something darker. The reload problem did not begin after the first month. It began on day one. One destroyer was already firing Tomahawks on the 1st of March 2026, which shows this campaign opened with premium naval strike power from the start. That matters because weapons like this get used early when leaders want to reach without exposing aircraft, and is crews to immediate risk. Once the opening rhythm depends on Tomahawks, the industrial countdown begins with the first launch. There's also human reality inside that image that people forget when they talk about missile counts. Like, they are just spreadsheet entries. Somebody stood the watch. Somebody loaded the doctrine. Somebody monitored the battle space. And somebody knew that every clean launch was both a tactical success and a small subtraction from a finite magazine. The people closest to these weapons understand something the public often does not. Impressive firepower and shrinking inventory can be true at the same time. And that is the trap in this whole story. The footage looks like control. The math underneath it looks like pressure. A second destroyer firing Tomahawks in the eastern Mediterranean on the 3rd of March 2026 shows this was not one symbolic volley from one ship. It was a distributed strike pattern across multiple platforms, which means the burn was structural, not theatrical. Launches like this look like pure dominance, but what they also reveal is how fast premium magazine depth can disappear once a war starts paying its bills in steel. And those launch cells do not magically refill at sea. A warship that has spent a chunk of its deep magazine is still dangerous, but it is not the same tool it was at the opening of the campaign. That matters because American power often depends not just on having platforms in theater, but on those platforms carrying the right mix of weapons at the right moment. So the story is bigger than America fired a lot of missiles. The real story is that a platform can remain visible, deployed, and intimidating while its most valuable offensive options are quietly thinning out. That is how a country can still look massive on the outside while feeling more constrained on the inside. This is also where the second theater fear starts creeping in. Tomahawks do not exist only for one regional war. They belong to a long-range precision toolkit that would matter in a much larger maritime conflict too, especially one where distance, anti-access threats, and the need for standoff strike become even more severe. That means every heavy burn in the Middle East creates a shadow over the Pacific, whether officials want to say it plainly or not. The missiles are being used where the war is now, but they are also being taken away from scenarios planners have feared for years. That is what makes the title bigger than Iran. A base quantity of 0 for FY 2025 shows just how disconnected peacetime acquisition logic was from wartime consumption reality. That matters because the system was leaning on modification work, restart, preparation, and future recovery instead of buying fresh missiles at the pace a real shooting war could suddenly demand. In other words, the arsenal looks stronger than the procurement rhythm underneath it. That single line is poison for the comforting story people tell themselves about American readiness. It does not mean the United States had no Tomahawks. It means the procurement system was not acting like it expected to. Spend them in a sustained, high-intensity way anytime soon. And once war punishes that assumption, every budget document starts reading like an X-ray. Numbers that once looked normal suddenly look exposed. Small purchases that once sounded efficient suddenly look like underbuilt depth wearing a suit and tie. This is where a lot of commentary gets lazy. People hear 850 fired and jump straight to dramatic slogans about running out, or they hear official reassurances and pretend there is no problem at all. Both reactions miss the real issue. Great powers usually do not slam into an obvious cliff where the last missile leaves the last tube and everyone gasps. What happens first is subtler and more dangerous. Options narrow, reserves become political. Commanders start husbanding premium munitions. And the space between what a nation can do and what it wants to spend starts shrinking. That is why America may need years to reload is such a lethal phrase. It forces you to think in calendar time instead of launch footage. It forces you to imagine not just tonight's strike package, but the next crisis arriving while this one is still draining the same shelves. And that matters even more because the war does not appear to have bought neat, total closure at a price this high. If the expenditure had clearly erased the missile problem in a way nobody could dispute, the pain would still be real. But the logic would feel stronger. Instead, the evidence points to something much uglier. A massive premium burn that still leaves serious uncertainty alive About one-third of Iran's missile arsenal confirmed destroyed is not the same thing as decisive closure after a massive Tomahawk burn. It means a huge premium strike effort still left a large part of the missile problem damaged, hidden, buried, inaccessible, or simply not confidently erased. That turns 850 from a symbol of control into a symbol of how expensive uncertainty has become. And that is where the title gets its deepest meaning. What 850 Tomahawks really means is not only that America spent a lot, it means America spent a lot without buying the kind of final certainty that would make that expenditure feel clean. That is a brutal place to be in modern war. Hardened targets, underground storage, dispersed launch systems, mobile assets, and incomplete battle damage assessment all combine to create the worst possible outcome for a premium arsenal. You keep paying, but the strategic answer refuses to become simple. The more that happens, the more the reload problem moves from the background to the center of the story. Because now the question is not just how many missiles were launched. The question becomes how many more might be needed if the problem is still partly alive, partly hidden, and partly recoverable. And that is where a number like 850 stops feeling big and starts feeling like the first terrifying down payment. And the Tomahawk issue does not even exist alone. It sits inside a wider war economy, where multiple categories of expensive munitions are being consumed at once, where defensive systems also burn inventory fast, and where the premium layers of military power start competing with each other for industrial attention. Once that happens, even a rich country can feel the edges of scarcity much faster than people expect. 11,294 munitions fired in the first 16 days shows the Tomahawk story sits inside a much wider depletion crisis. When a war starts consuming multiple high-end categories at once, the question stops being whether one missile line can, but recover, and becomes whether the whole force can stay lethal across months without sacrificing another front. That is how a regional war turns into a stress test for the entire arsenal. This is where the hidden industrial war begins. It is not just factories making more things. It is whether the system can absorb shock across missiles, interceptors, electronics, components, shipping, funding, and schedules all at the same time. If even one of those layers lags badly enough, the elegant combat system on paper turns into a waiting line. And the enemy does not need to beat America outright to exploit that. It only needs to keep forcing the United States to spend exquisite tools against persistent problems for longer than the replenishment system likes. In that kind of contest, endurance becomes a weapon all by itself. That is why the phrase command of the reload is so dangerous. It suggests that battlefield dominance alone is no longer enough if the industrial base behind it is too slow, too thin, or too optimized for peacetime assumptions. In a world like that, the country that can stay in the fight longest may not be the one with the flashiest opening strike. It may be the one that can refill faster, cheaper, and with less strategic panic. Now add China back into the frame and the title becomes even more disturbing. A Pacific war would not ask for fewer long-range precision weapons than this conflict. It would ask for more, at longer ranges, over a larger battle space, against a more formidable military, and under worse assumptions about time and attrition. A high-intensity conflict with China, burning through US munitions in roughly 25 days, is the nightmare context behind every Tomahawk launch in this war. The point is not that tomorrow's Pacific fight has already started. The point is that today's burn rate is being measured against a future scenario that would demand even more, even faster, and punish shortfalls even harder. That is the second theater tax in its rawest form. Every premium missile spent in one urgent war can narrow freedom in another possible war, even if nobody admits that out loud in the most confident public briefings. Great powers do not have to be empty to feel pressure. They only have to feel less free than they were supposed to be. And rivals do not need perfect intelligence to notice that. They only need enough evidence to suspect that American margins are thinner than advertised, that replacement takes longer than the news cycle, and that another sudden crisis would now arrive on top of an arsenal already carrying fresh scars. Deterrence does not disappear when that happens, but it gets heavier, more conditional, and more expensive. That is why future production announcements can calm people too quickly. They sound like rescue. They sound like the system has already corrected itself. But future capacity is not the present magazine depth. And paper recovery is not the same as having the weapons back in the cells that matter. A rise from about 60 Tomahawks per year to up to 1,000 per year sounds dramatic because it is dramatic, but it is still a future tense answer to a present tense depletion problem, which means America may eventually fix the gap while still living through a dangerous stretch of time inside it. The moment you understand that, years to reload stops sounding like a headline and starts sounding like cold math. And even that cold math comes with friction. Capacity targets are not the same as steady delivery. Contracts are not the same as inventory, and announced ramps do not magically erase the gap between what was spent last month and what will not physically exist again for years. You cannot refill launchers with optimism. So if we answer the title honestly, this is what 850 Tomahawks really means. It means the United States can still deliver terrifying opening power, but it may not have built a replacement machine fast enough to feel comfortable after doing so. It means the country can look overwhelming on launch night while quietly discovering that its true vulnerability is the calendar. It also means the old public image of effortless American firepower needs an update. A cruise missile launch used to symbolize pure control now can symbolize two things at once: incredible strength in the present and a dangerous bill for the future. That dual meaning is exactly why the audience clicks on a title like this. They want to know whether 850 is a flex or a warning. The honest answer is that it is a flex on the surface and a warning underneath. Because if a regional war can chew through premium weapons this fast, then the real question is not whether America looked strong while firing them. The real question is whether America has built the industrial depth to survive the next emergency before this one has even finished draining the shelves. And if the answer is only partly yes, that may be the most dangerous outcome of all. A country that still looks overwhelmingly strong can keep behaving as if it has endless slack right up until the moment the next crisis exposes that the slack was never endless, only hidden. That is the final translation of the title. 850 Tomahawks means America did not just spend missiles. It spent time, margin, flexibility, and some of the quiet comfort that comes from assuming reload will always be someone else's problem later. Stay dangerous, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next one.